I am very, very happy to be here. We'll talk about storytelling and pitching. And hopefully, as I understand, Frank, it's 30 minutes. Yeah.
Yes, it's 30, 35. You don't have, to be fair, pressure. But what happens is the students, they know because there's 4 students competing for the Wells Fargo Fast Speech this year. And you came one of these maybe 4 years, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I've kept doing it even through the pandemic. So last year was the 13th year and now it's the 14th year. And so I have 4 students and, they have a 60 seconds and then they have a 5 minutes. But we're only going to do the 60 seconds with you just for the sake of time. So this class is going to be much shorter than usual because we want to take advantage of you being there and for these students. The project they're working on is a group project, but then they compete as an individual. So the 4 people will actually benefit themselves for the competition, but also for their groups. So the class will be finished, I suppose, around 2:35, 2:40, and then we'll be just in private with those 4 individuals just to discuss their 60 seconds and training and all this. So I'm always trying to make the best out of all kinds of situations for everyone's benefit. So I think this is really good that you gave us this time, and your subject is directly connected to what they are doing as well. So obviously it's a very important subject for anyone who wants to go in business.
Yeah. Okay. I think I got the idea. So one of the things that I'll tell all of you a little bit of my background as we go along, but in the interest of time, we'll get started. One of the things when you think about storytelling and pitching, and perhaps these ideas are quite abstract to you at the moment, my goal is that in the next 30 minutes, hopefully I'm able to convince you that this is a skill that irrespective of where you go in your life, you would be needing it. And more than that, I want to demystify the idea that a lot of times people perceive storytelling and pitching, it's artistic. There is an element of art associated with it, and some people are artistic and some are not, right? So it's really cut and dry. And I take issues with that ideology because there is a science behind it. There is an actual formula behind it. And that formula is used by entrepreneurs, for people like yourself who are aspiring to launch new ventures. And the same formula is used by screenwriters in Hollywood, right? So it's the exact same formula, and we'll talk about that. So as long as you understand how that formula works and you're able to apply it, you'll be able to sort of develop that so-called art that people speak of that's incorporated in the idea of storytelling and pitching. So with that preamble, let's move on. And I'll tell you, before I talk about officially introducing these concepts to you, I'll tell you a little bit of my story. So a Fortune 500 client once asked me to develop the strategy for an investment product, specifically targeting millennials. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with these products, they are a dime a dozen in the financial services industry. So after an exhaustive market research, I pitched my client to forget about selling the investment product and instead sell an experience. My client mentioned that it was an eccentric pitch and the most creative one he had heard in a long time, because no one, and this is a few years ago, so no one really was talking about selling experience in the financial services business. A strategy was executed around customer experience and the product was a success. So you might wonder, how did I come up with this, supposedly original idea for the pitch to sell an experience? And the honest answer is, I did not. Howard Schultz came up with that idea. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, as you know, he truly believes that Starbucks is a third place, your home, your office, and that third place where you go and you hang out. And Starbucks isn't really selling coffee; it sells an experience. Now, what I did come up with was a pitch that takes an idea from an industry which is completely unrelated to financial services and makes it relevant to the financial services industry, right? So it's the intersection of coffee shops and financial services, where you don't see that there is a potential intersection, that there's a potential overlap, but there is, and the linchpin for that connection is that experience. So relevance is one of the core ingredients of pitching that we'll discuss shortly. But for now, let's talk about why pitch. Why would you ever want to pitch anything to anyone? So think of any situation where you want others to look at the world from your perspective, from your vantage point, from your frame of reference. Perhaps you want to convince your stakeholders to sponsor funding for a new project. Perhaps you want to embark on an acquisition and you need to convince the board that it's a good idea. Or perhaps on a personal level, you met that special someone and you want to convince this person to go out with you on a date. Or perhaps you want to convince your children that eating popcorn is bad for their health, right? Whatever it might be, if you're able to think of a situation where you have to make people believe in your frame of reference, in your vantage point, you would have to learn how to pitch and the skills of pitching. So hopefully all of you at this moment would conform to the idea that yes, at some point in your life, either you have already tried to convince someone about something, or you can see yourself doing so in the future. And if the answer is yes in any of those cases, then I think for the next 20 minutes or so, you will find this information beneficial. Okay, so a successful pitch tells a story that only you can tell. Okay, so it's not about facts and figures. It's not about demonstrating your analytical or business acumen. It's not about looking sharp in front of your audience. Now, of course, all of those things help, but at the end of the day, it's really about telling a story that only you can tell. So then the next obvious question is, what are stories all about? And a lot of people think that stories are about beautiful writing, using elegant words, being eloquent. And unfortunately, if you also think that way, then unfortunately you're mistaken, because stories are not about any of those things. But before I tell you what stories are all about, I want to sort of have a perspective on why so many people think that stories are about beautiful writing and using elegant words and being eloquent. Why is that? How did that connection how did that connection come about? So once upon a time, when you were cute, little, and innocent, your language teacher taught you structure and semantics over storytelling. And what I mean by structure and semantics, it's the grammar and the vocabulary, right? So when you started learning English, for example, or any other language, if you're bilingual, whatnot. So when you started learning English, a language, such as English, you started with the grammar, you started learning the structure of how to construct sentences. And then as you became better and better and better in structuring sentences, then you started learning and studying more and more complicated stuff, perhaps literature, perhaps things like this, the Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare, Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago, you might have heard of. I don't think Da Vinci Code was any sort of recommended literary writing in academia, but I have mentioned it here because it's a fantastic book. And so that's how your association of being good in a particular language is associated with storytelling, and beautiful writing is associated with storytelling. So I know that I am not making a very compelling case with you when I have, examples of Shakespeare and Boris Pasternak on the slide over here, and I tell you, yeah, you don't need beautiful writing to become a good storyteller, right? So I get it is not a very compelling case. So let me offer you an alternative perspective, which is 50 Shades of Grey, right? So if you have heard anything about this book, you would agree that critics argue that by far, from a literary value of this book, it is abysmal, right? But the question is, does it matter? And the answer is, obviously, it doesn't. If millions and millions of people are getting hooked to it, then it doesn't matter. So then the question is, if it doesn't matter, then what is it that matters? So now, hopefully, I have convinced you that using elegant words and flowery phrases and whatnot, that is not an ingredient for effective storytelling. So let's talk about the formula that anyone from an entrepreneur to a Hollywood screenwriter uses over and over and over. And you can see this pattern. Actually, if you watch movies, you'll be able to see this pattern. So the formula goes like this. A story is the hero's journey, which requires an event or incident that inspires the hero to take action in the pursuit of a challenging goal, the attainment of which brings an internal transformation to the hero. So that's the formula for storytelling. So let's break this down into individual components so you have a better appreciation for it. So a story is the hero's journey. Who's the hero? You're the hero. It's your career path, the personal choices that you made in your life. It's your journey, which requires an event or incident, which is to say, what brought you to the idea, whatever idea that you have, that inspires, in other words, why your idea matters to you. Why are you so passionate about it? What's the source of that inspiration? So that inspires the hero to take action. What steps did you take in order to materialize that idea? Were you afraid if you were to fail, what would happen? In the pursuit of a challenging goal, which is to say, how do you intend to change the world? One of the core ingredients of any successful pitch is you want to be able to answer, how do you intend to change the world? Comma, the attainment of which brings an internal transformation, which is to say, how working towards the goal, whatever goal you set for yourself, transformed you. What mistakes did you make? What did you learn from it? And how is it that you are a better person now than before as you pursued and you walked on this journey? Okay, so that's hopefully it's less of an abstract notion at this point, but I want to make sure that you really understand this concept. So I'll solidify this by telling you a story. So the story goes like this. The story is based in California. In 1997, there was a guy, he went to a video store to rent Apollo 13, which he forgot to return by over 6 weeks. So he had to pay $40 late fees. It was his fault. And he was so embarrassed that he didn't even want to tell his wife. Later that day, on his way to the gym, he had an epiphany. He had an epiphany that fitness clubs or gyms in general, they have an interesting business model, work out as little or as much you want for a flat monthly fee. So he decided to start an online video rental company with the business model of gym membership. He had no idea whether the business model would work or not. 3 years later, he had amassed about 300,000 subscribers, and his company was losing money left and right. You see, as humans, we are a creature of habits, and we like instant gratification. If you want to watch a movie right now, we're not going to wait for a DVD to show up in 5 days from now in the mail. And overnight shipping is expensive. So finally, he gave up on his business idea and he offered to be acquired by Blockbuster, which used to be one of the largest networks of video rental stores. If you're familiar, what those stores used to look like back in the days when people would actually rent DVDs. So he pitched his idea to Blockbuster. Blockbuster laughed at the proposal, and he had no choice but to swallow his pride and kept moving forward. He perfected the distribution center network that he was having problems with, so that more than 80% of customers received overnight delivery of movies. In 2010, his company made a profit of $160 million, and Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy the same year. So as you might have guessed, this is the Netflix story. This is the story of its founder, Reed Hastings, Perhaps you know the story already, or perhaps you heard it for the first time today. What I really want you to do is focus on the core elements of storytelling that we just talked about. So let's break down the formula one more time. A story is the hero's journey. That is, in case of Reed Hastings, it's developing a company with a multi-billion-dollar market cap. That's essentially his journey has been up to this point. The event was the late fees, as we talked about earlier. That inspires the hero. So in that case, he was really wondering about what would happen if he marries one business model from one industry to another business model in a different industry, kind of like the financial services example that I gave you earlier from my experience. And the action that he took was the creation of an online video rental store. The challenging goal he had was a new delivery channel for media consumption. He had no idea whether it would work or it would fall apart. And the internal transformation from incepting an idea to nourishing it until it blossoms. He had to face rejections. He had to face a lot of criticism and skepticism about what he was doing, but he kept on going and going and going. So that's essentially sums up the formula for storytelling. Does it make sense to you guys? Do you guys follow so far what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good. All right. So a successful pitch tells a story that only you can tell. And I have said that 2 times already. But what does that really mean when I say a story that only you can tell? What does that mean? Why is the emphasis on the you? And that means that the authenticity, the passion, the relevance that you would bring to the story, nobody else would. Okay, and a neat way to remember authenticity, passion, and relevance is the acronym APR, which, given my finance background, means annual percentage rate. But in this particular context, it's authenticity, passion, and relevance. So now that we have covered high-level basics of what storytelling is all about, I do want to point out one fundamental difference between storytelling and pitching. So actually, before I do that, let's make this a little interesting. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is, what do you think is the difference between storytelling and pitching? And I know it's an unfair question because I haven't really introduced the topic of pitching at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you out by illustrating examples from the movie business. So on the left, you're going to see examples of 2 movies that depict the idea of storytelling that we have just talked about. And on the right, you're going to see examples of 2 movies that also kind of sort of depict the idea of storytelling that we have talked about, but the way those stories are communicated in the movies that are more akin to pitching rather than storytelling. And hopefully you have seen those movies. Obviously, if you haven't, then you wouldn't know anything about what I'm talking about. So Sleepless in Seattle, One Fine Day, examples of storytelling. Inception, Avengers, Infinity War, examples of pitching. So if you have seen those movies, what do you think, in your opinion, is the difference between storytelling and pitching?
Would it be that storytelling has a definitive end?
Mm-hmm.
And pitching, I mean, it's an idea, so you would have to carry it out.
Oh yeah, that's right, Jose. That's right on the money. That's very perceptive of you. Yes, that is essentially the difference between storytelling and pitching. So I talked about challenging goal as one of the components in the storytelling formula. The attainment of the challenging goal is yet to happen. That's what pitching is all about, right? You are telling an incomplete story and building anticipation to get a buy-in from stakeholders on your vision. You're creating a utopian vision that might materialize or it might not. But it is the vision that you are trying to sell in order to get buy-in from the stakeholders. So when you do that, that's pitching. So if you have seen Inception, for example, there is the character of Leonardo DiCaprio, and in the end, he's united with his family. But it's not conclusive because you don't know for a fact if in the end of that movie, if he was dreaming or if he was really united with his family. You would like to believe that, there is a happily ever after ending and that story goes on. You would like to believe that, but you don't know for a fact if that actually happened or not happened. Versus, Sleepless in Seattle or One Fine Day, it's a typical rom-com, boy meets girl hates boy hates girl, and then they fall in love and live happily ever after, right? So that kind of idea. So that's the fundamental difference between storytelling and pitching, which is the attainment of the challenging goal is yet to happen. Okay, so I want to summarize some of these points for you so that you remember them. So points to remember: the successful pitch tells a story that only you can tell, which means that the level of authenticity, passion, and relevance that you will bring to the story, nobody else would. Key components of a story are an event or incident that offers inspiration towards an action or series of actions, for that matter, in the pursuit of a challenging goal, bringing an internal transformation to the hero. And the key difference between storytelling and pitching is that the attainment of the challenging goal is yet to happen. Okay, so I will conclude it over here with some few ideas that I want to share with you. This is the most I could do in 30 minutes. But if you want to explore more of these ideas, then what you want to learn about is what your pitch must answer. And the answer to that question is, how do you intend to change the world, right? If you give me a 60-second pitch, a 5-minute pitch, 15-minute pitch, if you can't answer in a precise manner, how do you intend to change the world, then your pitch has no meaning whatsoever. And some people get nervous about the idea of, well, my idea is not that big. It's not really about changing the world, so that's okay. I'm using the term world, loosely. It could be, how do you intend to change your community? And that's fine too. But a pitch should be a messenger of change, of hope, of optimism, of not accepting the status quo, whatever that status quo is. And as long as you can articulate that, you're in a good place. The second thing is, what should be the tone of the pitch? And this goes into great detail of it, and I don't have that much time to talk about it, but it starts with identifying core of the message. And one of the mistakes people do is that they give a laundry list of all the things, that their product or their service is going to change. And that's a bad idea. You want to focus on one, maximum two, no more than 2 ideas that should be part of the core of your message. So if that sounds abstract to you, let me give you an example. Herb Keller, who died a couple of years ago, he was the co-founder of Southwest Airlines. And once he was asked, what does Southwest Airlines represent? And he said, I can teach you the secret to running this airline in less than 30 seconds. We are the lowest fare airline. That's all he said. And it's actually less than 10 seconds, right? I mean, if you have traveled through Southwest Airlines, you know that there are a lot of positives associated with this particular airline, whether it's a hassle-free check-in, efficiency, all sorts of things that you can talk about, simplicity. But one idea that Keller honed on was lowest fare airline, and that was the core of this message, of his message. So in the same spirit, when you are pitching an idea, a product, a service, whatever that is, you want to focus on 1, maximum 2 core components of your message, no more than that. Building anticipation, you want to keep your audience at the edge of their seat so that they are waiting to hear from you and see what comes next, so on and so forth. And then finally, you should connect your message with your personal brand, which again goes back to a story that only you can tell. So I usually do this, and this is over 3 hours. Long presentation with videos and all sorts of things, but hopefully this will give you enough content so that you can build upon these things and explore as you move forward. And I would conclude by quoting Thomas Edison, nearly every man who develops an idea works it up to the point where it looks impossible, and then he gets discouraged. That's not the place to become discouraged. Right, so the theme of this session, as I said, the science of storytelling and pitching. And in that sentiment, we must realize that our ideas that are bestowed upon us, they have the potential to flourish and make a meaningful contribution in this world. But it is our responsibility that we nurture and cherish these ideas. So your next job, your next invention, and your next discovery, it's all right around the corner. And only you can decipher the code to get there. And it all begins with you being able to tell a story that only you can tell. So go out there and unleash the creative storyteller inside you. Thank you. I will share my contact information here. You're more than welcome to reach out if you have any further questions.